Welcome everyone again. We are back with Ignite's knowledge series entitled What Is? We had a break of 2 weeks for the Sports Event Management Foundation Level 1 course organized in collaboration with the University Putra Malaysia Sports Academy. And I hope that we will get some of the participants from the course here today, because we did say to them that we are going to have this episode today, which is going to be very interesting post what we had learned in our sports event management course. So my name is Neil, and together with Ilva, Gustavo, and Xuanming, my co-founders of Ignites, we hope that everyone who is tuning in today is ready to enrich their brain and learn. So if you have not joined us before, allow me to give you a brief introduction about Ignites and let you know why we have launched this online series. Ignites is an international network of event professionals who wants to make a difference in the events world. We provide specialized consultancy services in combination with active and integrated support of project delivery. We are also strong advocates of education, and it is one of Ignite's main pillars. Within the scope of education is knowledge sharing, and we believe that knowledge sharing is vital to the continued innovation and improvement of policies and processes in the sports industry, and actually in all other industries for that matter. With that in mind, Ignite launched the What Is series, which serves as a cornerstone of what we hope to be a rich source of information for future and established event professionals alike. The founders of Ignites, who have been working in the industry for the past decade, realized that it is not very easy to obtain information and knowledge of the industry, especially in specific topics around the planning and organization of a sport event, without getting practical experience working in an organizing committee or attending a sport event itself. So the aim of this series is to provide you some of that knowledge and information about specific areas in events. And today we have a very special episode, and we will be addressing the topic of what is event evaluation. Did you know that a very important element in the success of an event is data? From participants' data to accommodation data to travel data, a lot of data is also produced as a result of the number of nights stayed in a particular host location, to the amount of tickets sold, to the frequency of people visiting a concession stand. So why should we be collecting this data and aligning it with our event hosting objectives? Can it provide better insight, and when analyzed and reported, act as a transfer of knowledge tool for future event organizers? Can it help event owners to communicate the benefits of hosting their events? So to address these questions and more, we have invited Colin, Stewart, and Chris Kropielnicki from Quantum Consultancy to enlighten us on how objective-led strategies in event evaluation allow for events to be better planned and implemented in future to maximize event impact. Colin has built up 8 years of experience working in the sports industry in a variety of roles, including senior analyst at SportCal, where he authored numerous studies and reports as part of the Global Sports Impact Project. And in 2019, he co-founded Quantum Consultancy, which offers research and evaluation services to the events industry. Colin works with rights owners and destinations to develop event strategies, conduct bespoke research projects, and leads evaluation processes which evidence whether events are achieving positive impacts and meaningful legacies. Chris joined Quantum Consultancy as Head of Insights and Analytics in 2020. And before joining Quantum Consultancy, Chris worked also for SportCal for over 8 years, delivering over 40 evaluation projects across events ranging from youth and senior world championships in athletics, badminton, curling, equestrian, floorball, sailing, and wrestling, to multi-sport games such as the World Games and the FISU Winter and Summer Universiade. Okay, so I think it's time to bring our two guests in. Hi, Colin. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Nino.
Hello, Neo. How are you?
Chris, actually, where are you tuning in from?
It is Warsaw, Poland. I'm Polish, so yes, call me Chris, but my full name is Krzysztof Kropielnicki. Don't even try to pronounce it.
All right, it's nice to meet you, and also Colin, it's nice to see you again because we met each other in London. So
Absolutely, yeah, been a long time since then.
Yeah, it's been a long time. Okay, so I'm not going to delay, and I think our audiences would like to hear more about what is event evaluation. So I'm just gonna pass you the floor. So if anybody has any questions during the course of the presentation, please do not hesitate to use the chat function and ask questions to these two very data-driven guys. All right, all the best to you, Colin and Chris.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Neo. That's greatly appreciated. You make us sound very, very important people. So hello to everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's What Is session. So Chris and I will be talking to you about event evaluation and our agenda for today's session. So we're going to be following the format of the Ignites Knowledge series, and I'll begin by outlining what we mean by event evaluation, alongside a broad definition in the context of this session. And we'll also cover event impact and the logic chain model, which we use when we evaluate events. Chris will talk us through why we should be evaluating them, the different motivations for doing so, and why it can play an important role, not just for the event that we evaluate, but also for all of the stakeholders involved. And you'll come to see that there are a lot of stakeholders involved when it comes to event evaluation. We'll also talk about the building blocks, so the keys to success to a great event evaluation. And we'll finish with some reflections and learnings that we've picked up over the years. In total between us, as Neil mentioned, we've produced more than 40 projects worldwide. So we're excited to be sharing some of our knowledge and thoughts here today. So let's get to it. What is event evaluation? So a commonly used definition, which covers things quite comprehensively, is that event evaluation is concerned with assessment, which usually involves measuring a set of key variables, as well as monitoring those variables to determine positive and negative outcomes. It is a subjective determination that can utilize objective quantitative measures. So what we're saying here is that we're assessing, we're measuring key data metrics, and we're monitoring those metrics to determine success. And as part of this, what we're also doing is we're seeking to understand what worked well and what didn't during the planning phases and delivery of an event. So this ultimately leads to a wider knowledge transfer process, which really does help to ensure that the mistakes of the past aren't repeated, but it also means that instead of event owners and organizers reinventing the wheel every edition of an event, we can actually transfer knowledge from one to the other. And this just helps us to improve events in the future as well. So at Quantum Consultancy, when it comes to assessing and evaluating events, we're actually looking at the event impact that is generated in the host economy. So what is event impact? Well, a brief definition here. We can say that event impact is the net additional benefits generated within a local economy as a result of an event taking place in that particular geographical location. So the event impacts, these can usually be defined as economic impact, social impact, or environmental impact, but these can be drilled down further depending on the objectives of an event and how we're evaluating. So if we keep that term objective top of mind, this is a logic chain model on the screen now, and we use this when we evaluate events because it's all based around these objectives set by the stakeholders. And what this model allows us to do is it gives us a broad end-to-end view of the event life cycle. And we start by understanding the hosting objectives of these stakeholders. So we ask the question, why are you hosting this event? And then we apply data metrics to the inputs that are going into an event. So this could be anything from finance, it could be expertise, resources, equipment, everything that you put into an event to make it happen. we're attaching data metrics to help monitor the progress of this. The event then takes place, it's delivered, we make our observations, we conduct some stakeholder interviews, there's field work, aggregation of data, and then we have the outputs. So these are your athletes compete, they win medals, we put on a fan zone, sponsors have activation sites. The data that we're collecting is monitoring all of this process from start to finish. And then we get to our outcomes and our impacts, which are measured on a short, medium, or long-term basis. And they're all reverting back to the objectives set at the very beginning so that we can say whether the event was a success or not. So that gives us a quick overview as to what is event evaluation and in the context of this session and what we're talking about. And I'll pass over to Chris, who's going to talk a bit about why we would want to evaluate events in the first place. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Colin. Yes, once again, good morning to everyone, or depending on where you are, good evening, good afternoon, maybe. Key question, why? We should always challenge ourselves with this question, irrespective of what we do. And it's the same with the event evaluation. Why shall we evaluate events? And I'm sure that amongst those of you that are listening to us at the moment, there are many people who are very passionate about event delivery, who believe in the value of major events, of events in general. So do we. Chris, Colin, we love events. But the point we would like to make today is if you don't measure, if you don't evaluate, if you don't have a knowledge transfer program, what do you really know about your event? What do you really know about its impacts? How do you check whether your objectives, original objectives, which you set out at the beginning of the process, have been met? How do you convince other organizations that it's worth working with you? It could be potential bidders, it could be commercial partners. And the brutal truth is that many event owners are struggling to explain the benefits of hosting events to the host, to potential bidders. The hosts obviously want to believe in the universal value of staging big sporting events, and they want to justify the expenditure on hosting and bidding to the public, to the local government, to the media, but it's not that easy. So you need to evaluate, because it is about accountability, it is about justification, it is about also encouraging commercial investment. But probably most of all, especially from the event owner standpoint, it's about making events better. You want to evaluate and measure to make your events better. So there is a popular belief that major sports events, especially international events, generate a variety of different benefits to the host city or region. It could be economic and tourism, commercial and marketing, image and reputation, as you can see on the slide here. So this is all true, but at the same time, it's all unfortunately false. Because event owners, from our experience, from what we've seen in the industry, tend to oversell their events. So they tell you, you're going to have hundreds of tourists or thousands of tourists coming to your city. Now, we're gonna ensure that there is a global media reach for the event. So you're going to be in 150 territories. It's going to help you to increase sport participation. It's going to help you to create positive social legacies. But the fact is, once the event has been awarded, in many cases, event owners do not support the organizers, the hosts, in making sure that all this happens. The event hosts, at the same time, they may be even a bit naive in thinking, okay, this is all going to happen. They want to believe in that because obviously they want to justify this investment. They want to transform the host city or region through a single event. But quite often, once the event is over, there is some disappointment. You do the cost-benefit analysis, and it turns out that many of those benefits were just on paper. So let's look at an example. It's sport participation. We refer to London 2012 on this slide here, but it's not all black and white with London 2012. So this is just a theoretical example. People have been saying for a long while, major events will help you increase sport participation. But does it really happen? From what we've seen, many hosts do not allocate any funds to sport participation programs. And if you don't do that, then obviously there is no guarantee that you're going to bring returns in that area. So we've seen this times and times again. But on the other hand, if you make increasing sport participation one of your major objectives from the outset, you develop sport participation programs, but also a measurement and monitoring system will be put in place, then the likelihood of success of that will be far greater. So we've got to focus on those long-term benefits if we want to convince our stakeholders locally, nationally, that it's worth organizing an event. But it's not happening very often. We did an analysis some time ago about major international events taking place every single year. There is, let's say, around 100 major world championships, multi-sport games taking place every year. And it turned out that 1 in 10 hosts of those events either withdraws from hosting at some point or is stripped of the hosting rights by the event owner. And that's mostly due to public, political, media pressure, the inability to secure finances for the event. So those benefits, as I said before, are quite often on paper, but it's really difficult to make sure that everything is working in practice. So Olympic Games is obviously the example that all of us know. That we know what issues they had in terms of attracting hosts. For 2024, 4 of the 6 bidders withdrew from the process. That left Paris and Los Angeles in the running, and obviously IOC made a wise decision to award 2024 and 2028 Olympics at the same time. But it shows that there is a problem. And finally, it is about benefits. It is about pinpointing those benefits in event evaluation, but it's also about identifying costs. It's about identifying missed opportunities. It's about lessons learned. You have some examples on the slide of those potential hosts. This is also an incredible value of sort of an evaluation exercise. Okay, with that, I'll pass it back to Colin, who will tell you more about event stakeholders.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And as mentioned at the very beginning, I said there's a lot of stakeholders to consider when evaluating the impact of an event. And of course, the emphasis of any event evaluation is always going to depend upon who's responsible for commissioning the research in the first place. So from our experience, the most comprehensive evaluations, they come when there's a strong pre-existing relationship between the event owner, the organizer, and the host destination, so 3 of our key stakeholders. So an event evaluation could be commissioned by one of these parties on their own, but this can make it difficult to find alignment in their objectives. We call the owner of specific data a gatekeeper. So one of the first things that we aim to do when we're evaluating an event and setting up the project is to map out these key gatekeepers across the different stakeholders. So the buy-in here is important because we need everyone's engagement. For the host city, this could potentially be around the event evaluation process. It sits in the middle of these stakeholders, and the host city may be responsible for the transport hub, for example, before an event. So this could be your airport or your train station, and they're actually taking into account the arrivals and departures information alongside of the organizing committee. And your event owner may take responsibility for the technical officials that are required to officiate at the event, and they'll be coordinating with the organizing committee about how to get them there, where they're staying, get them into the accreditation system. And all of this data is important to us when we evaluate events, and it needs to be collated and it needs to be consistently assessed as we go along. So for the event organizer, it really kind of depends on the size and scale of the event that we're looking at. But if we take this example, the multi-sport games, what we're seeing here is that data can be spread across a lot of different departments. And this can be anything from your accommodation, your accreditation system, your finance and budgets. We need to identify who holds this data. And in the ideal scenario, what we look to do is work with the organizing committee, who will appoint a key staff member who takes responsibility for collating this data internally. And they can do that because we provide the specific data metrics that they need to collate. So working together, we can make a far more efficient process in evaluating these events. So here's on the screen some of the objectives that some of the stakeholders have set in the past on the projects that we've worked on. You can see here, showcase, develop and promote the sport globally, to have a successful and memorable event, to have a competitive edge for the host nation's athletes. So all of these different objectives you can take a guess as to who set these in terms of the stakeholders, but in truth, a lot of these can be set by multiple stakeholders. So it kind of emphasizes the importance to set your objectives early as possible. And you'll always find that the objective setting consultation phase, it should be at the very beginning, which Chris will come on to talk about. But we usually see this, events will have a steering committee or a board, and they will run through that exercise. And what we're saying is that it needs to be as early as possible. So when it comes to stakeholder considerations, what we're saying is know your stakeholders and map them out. Ask the question, is the event data that you require available? And if it's not available, what processes do you need to put into place? What collection methods do you have to install into this process to make sure that you have the data that you need to evaluate? And of course, as I mentioned, who is the gatekeeper to the data that you require? Ideally, we appoint that person in the organizing committee to help facilitate that data collection process. And it's important to remember as well that every event is different, so your stakeholder groups can change quite significantly. And you need to take into consideration the broadcasters, the sponsors, the athletes, the media, the VIPs. There's a lot of different client groups within an event that we have to take into account. So we've covered what is event evaluation and why we evaluate and the stakeholders involved. And I'll pass back to Chris, who will talk about the building blocks for a successful event evaluation. So I'll pass back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Colin. So yes, the building blocks, our keys to a good, successful evaluation, as Colin said. Firstly, as explained just now, you need the buy-in from the stakeholders. Without that buy-in, it's difficult to get the evaluation right. So you need to get people to collaborate, the event owner, the event organizer, the event host, because these organizations usually have the data that you require. And then secondly, it's all about timing. That is really one of the key lessons from what we've seen and what we've experienced working on those projects. So most of the time, unfortunately, the evaluation window is very small. That means that we come in shortly before the event, because that's when the project is commissioned. And that window is simply not big enough for us to implement some of the processes that we would like to implement to conduct a successful, comprehensive evaluation. And what that means, if you come in late, then obviously some of the data is already lost. Some of the information is not captured because you didn't set the process right at the beginning. So to give you an example, for one event that we worked on, the work was commissioned just 2-3 weeks before the event. So this is when we came in and tried to set up the evaluation. Most of the time, it's 2-3 months before the event. This is when the event owners or the organizers are out there in the market looking for an evaluation company. But what we would ideally like to see is that, especially for the event organizers or the hosts, you think about the evaluation straight away. So at the bid inception process, because when you submit a bid for an event, you should already know your objectives. You should already know why you want to bring the event to town. If you don't, then that really is an issue. So you should start at the bid inception phase. If you are the event owner, then maybe once the event has been awarded, and if you are the one sort of commissioning the research, then yes, for the event owners, it can be slightly later, but the sooner, the better. Then thirdly, you've got to focus on the legacy and link the evaluation back to your original objectives for hosting the event. So for example, you've got to explain those net additional benefits that are generated as a result of the event taking place. You've got to present the results against the objectives, the legacy objectives of the event stakeholders. And in terms of those objectives, you've got to determine metrics that you're going to use to assess whether those objectives have been met also as early as possible. When you do that, then you're going to have a very clear roadmap in terms of both how through event delivery, but also measurement, check whether the objectives have been met and ensure that they have been met. So this is just an example. If one of your objectives is to deliver a successful and memorable event for attendees, then of course you, in terms of the event organization, you do everything you can to make sure that you create the best possible environment for that. And then during the event or once the event is over, you just survey satisfaction. Hopefully there's going to be a positive experience, and in terms of the outcomes or impacts, in this case, the perception, for example, of your host city improves as well. Okay, so we are heading towards the end, so let's reflect on what we've learned today through presenting some of the key challenges and observations. I'm going to do the challenges part. So the first challenge we have when we do our evaluation projects is about the lack of availability of data, or the data not being provided in a consistent manner. And this still surprises us. We go to a federation, sometimes even a big international federation, and they do not possess the data that we ask for. It could be attendance information from previous events, from previous editions of an event that we are trying to analyze. It could be volunteer data in terms of, okay, how many volunteers did support the process, where did they come from, what were the age groups, etc., etc. People are not thinking about capturing this information and are not thinking about storing this information in terms of being able to do historical comparisons as well. Secondly, what is important is often not measured, and everyone who has had something to do with marketing and sales knows that we like measuring what is easy to measure and not what is important. This is a struggle. This is a problem as well, especially when we think about social legacies, for example, or social impacts. These are not measured very often by people. Because people do focus on economic and media impacts. It's something that everyone else is doing, so why don't we do it as well? But if your objective is not to generate, to be in 150 media territories, then why do you need media impact data? Perhaps you should be focusing on something else. Number 4 is about consistency, the lack of consistency in terms of methodologies and terminologies being used. When we do the studies, we aggregate data from many sources. Sometimes we work very closely with other data suppliers, monitoring services providers as well. And what we always find out is that there is a lack of consistent methodology. There is a lack of standard. It doesn't help us in terms of being able to compare events or compare different editions of events. Numbers are inflated and not reliable. We've all seen these headlines. And do you know what the most watched event has been over the last decade? It's not the FIFA World Cup. It's not the Olympic Games. It is, according to the data, 6.8 billion people who tuned in to watch the FINA Aquatics World Championships in 2015. That's according to the official press release. I will leave you to judge whether that figure is something that you would like to trust in. Then event owners and organizing committees immersed into delivering sports competition. This is a problem both from the legacy standpoint and the evaluation standpoint. So obviously event owners really focus on coordinating the event, sometimes delivering the event, but they are not experts in terms of building legacies. Organizing committees themselves, due to the setup they have, quite often also focus on the competition itself, on the 2, 5, 10, 14 days of the competition, but don't take a look at the wider picture. Measurement is an afterthought, and this is what we said about timing as well. People come to us very late because, wait a minute, we've got an event in 2 months' time, we've got to do something, we've got to justify the spend. Then they come, then they ask to do, for example, an event experience survey. But if your objective is, for example, to engage the local community, should it really be about those 14 days of the event, or should it be about the entire organizational period, but also about what is going to happen after the event? So we would always recommend, for example, to survey people before, during, and after, and not just during one of those phases. And then finally, it's about evaluation processes being designed to prove a point. So people sometimes want to do an evaluation because they have an agenda in mind and they want the figures to show what they have in mind. So then figures are provided without context. Just the biggest figures, the biggest numbers are used because they are the evidence. No, they are not. Unfortunately, that objectivity is sometimes missing in evaluations. And this, for example, if an event owner is going to tell you that they generated millions of social media impressions, you can always challenge them. What does it actually mean? How does it compare to other events? How does it compare to other sports? What is your definition of an impression? This information is sometimes lacking when people report on those figures. These are our key challenges when we do evaluations. And what about our observations, Colin?
Yeah, so finally here, some key observations that we've made over the years when it comes to evaluating events and working with stakeholders and various partners. Firstly, the benefits of hosting sports events are often undervalued. And there are a number of different reasons for this, but I think an important one to note and what we've seen is that there's a greater focus on the social impact that events can generate and the benefits that can bring host locations and communities. And this is an area that's very much still in its infancy, and a lot more research needs to be done here. And in future, we can now put a dollar value on some of these social impacts, but I think a lot more needs to be done here so that we can truly understand the impact of sports events. Secondly, taking a wider view of the holistic impact that events can generate can help stakeholders to identify the bigger picture and the associated benefits. So it enables them to see the true impact and the value of their events. It helps them to engage with participants and the general public, and I would say on a deeper level. And it also helps to improve future editions of the event by taking this knowledge onto the next organisers. And an important one here is that everyone has their own interpretation and assessment of the impact and benefits that events can bring. And the most important thing is that we all have a common language and a standard methodology for gathering, analysing, but reporting and communicating on that data. And I think that the point that Chris made there was very, very valid, because what we see is that the press releases that come out after some of these big events that put some big numbers out there, that's all they are. They're just big numbers. Unless we're going to be transparent and share the evaluation process, the methodologies behind it, and actually discuss the data, then we're not going to be able to learn anything and take the industry forward and improve events of the future and develop. And fifth, capturing the narrative as well as the data is very important. So the narrative here can tell us why things happen the way they do. So this can be just as important as any data and hard numbers that we put into an evaluation. And finally, as we keep saying, setting your goals early and decide how they're going to be evaluated using your data metrics is also an important factor. So to summarize, what to consider when evaluating your events? Always start by questioning the objectives. So ask the stakeholders, why are you doing this? Why are you hosting this event? Set and document those objectives and assign key data metrics to these. Monitor the progress towards achieving these objectives, and always take the time to reflect. I think it's important to always look back and take the time to look back. Don't just go in one event onto the next, but look back and ask what worked well, what didn't, how could we improve this next time? That's the only way that we're going to learn and to improve events going forward. So that is event evaluation in a short and hopefully informative nutshell. And thanks very much for listening. And we'll be doing our best to answer any questions that you might have. So at this point, I'll hand back over to you, Neo.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Chris. That was very interesting even for me to hear. What surprises, not surprised me, but what is new to me is I like the fact that you said the gatekeeper to collect data, because we who worked in the organizing committee, we are not really informed of what are the information that we need to collect in terms of matrix of data that we need to use at the end. We are normally informed, okay, you need to collect this data for the current situation, and having that gatekeeper, if from an organizing committee point of view, if we were informed in advance saying that we need this to collect this data, then I guess more important data and more substantial data can be collected, because as what you said, it should be defined from the beginning, to align with the objective of the event. So that was very interesting for me to hear, and I think you should tell that to a lot of different organizing committees, so that we in the organizing committee is able to also understand the relevance of collecting information.
Yeah, I think it's an important point, and with any organising committee, as we're saying, people are experts in their individual field, whether it be event registrations or dealing with the athletes' village or sport competition. And as you say, people deal with the data they have in front of them. Their focus is on planning and delivering their aspect of the event. So by putting these processes in place as early as possible, we can almost empower everyone to collect the data that is needed on the back end of the event in order to prove success.
Yeah, definitely. So we have 2 questions that have come from the floor. So the first one is from Gustavo, and he says, Tokyo 2020 presented some measures to reduce 280 million in its budget. What do you believe are the risks and impacts of such cuts? They will threaten the success of the events, or will it become a new benchmark in the sense of making mega events more sustainable? Was COVID the needed push to review service levels?
Yeah, so I start, Colin. So yeah, it's really interesting because we've worked with some event owners that held their events in, for example, Asia or Russia, say China, Russia, a few other Asian countries, and we know that in some to an extent it's easier to have events in those countries because financials sometimes are not an issue. But the event owners that we've worked with are saying, we don't want, okay, it all looks brilliant here. There's a fantastic level of service. I was at the one sort of multi-sport games event and someone was saying it's a better level of service than the Olympics. But at the same time, they say, we don't want the potential bidders to think that this is the level of service that we are expecting for future events. It's not exactly what we are looking for, because if it was, then that means that every single event that we stage in the future would cost the organizer hundreds of millions. And this is not the impression that we want to create. So I think it's not just the AOC through the agenda that Thomas Bach promotes, but also other event owners that are already thinking about, okay, how can we cut down those costs? And we don't have the full background, the full overview of what is currently going on in Tokyo to understand whether the cuts that they are proposing can jeopardize the event itself in terms of the level of service. But I like to use one example here, and I can get the figure wrong here because it was from a couple of years ago. But I know that, for example, in terms of the Olympic Games, one of the requirements to the host is about the time, the maximum time that the athletes can wait for a lift in an Olympic Village building. And I think that time was reduced from X number of seconds to Y number of seconds by the AOC a couple of years ago, maybe 3-4 years ago. And from what I read, that meant a saving of tens of millions of dollars to the IOC. Just the fact that you need less, sort of a smaller number of lifts in the buildings. So I think there's certainly for the mega events, there's certainly a lot of cost-saving measures that can be taken that won't have a negative impact on the experience of the participants.
Yeah, I think I would add to that as well that no one can really be envious of Tokyo's position right now because it's new. We haven't been here before. The COVID situation is constantly developing. We're learning new things. So in terms of will this become a new benchmark? Well, I just hope that there are processes in place to evaluate this because it is such an important case study to take into future events ways in which we can reduce costs, because I think that's everyone's end goal. We want to reduce costs to make it more viable for more cities to host the Olympic Games, whether it be in one location or across a whole country spread across different cities.
Yeah, I think COVID definitely expedited this because there's a lot of correlation between service levels and cost, right? And well, that brings me to one question that I have. I mean, based on your experience and the data, do you think that because of this cost and because of the service levels that's needed to serve the Olympics, that it has become less and less interesting for cities to bid for the Olympics, because we can see that the trend has really reduced. I mean, right now you only see 2 or 3 cities that are interested, but whereas maybe 20 years ago you get about 15, 12 cities. So based on the data, what does it tell us actually?
I can say, and I would say in my own personal view, this would be, I would say that the interest in hosting the Olympic Games hasn't fallen off, that the bids have, but the interest in hosting haven't. The Olympic Games will always be the pinnacle event. It creates such a buzz. Everyone will always be interested in hosting. I think that the problem is that the communication around the benefits of hosting has been non-existent. Now that we're seeing far more referenda, and that's been responsible for bids not going forward. So they may not be a formal bid, but there was planning done, there's feasibility work being done all around the world in cities to see, do we want to host this event? And when the costs and when we have to put it to the public and they vote against it, the problem is the message, it's the messaging. So we need to be evaluating in order to demonstrate these benefits better and communicate them better in a digestible format, so that the public can then make their own decision, an informed decision, and say, actually, yes, we do want this event coming here, and they'll vote for it. So I think it's more about the communication, the messaging, than it is the interest levels, and that's my personal view.
Yeah, and it still amazes us, because if you apply to host a multi-sport games, then of course you must know that you're going to be challenged by the local public, by the media about the cost. If you cannot explain that, if you cannot explain the difference between capital costs and organizational costs, if you cannot address some of those questions, then what are you doing? I mean, you really need to understand that this is going to be one of the first questions that you're going to be asked. Is it worth organizing it? And why is it worth organizing it? So it's not just to the event owners to help the organizers, the hosts, to explain that, but it's certainly one of the things that the event owners need to focus on, especially those that are sort of owning those mega events.
So I think the message is actually the event owners need to work with governments and host cities itself to make sure that the public gets the correct message of the benefits. Because if we see in the media, sometimes the information is twisted, so the public cannot make a proper judgment of whether it's good or not to bring the games to their city. So we have 2 more questions. That's good. We have very interested audiences. We have a question from Mr. Tero Kalsta. Obviously, owners have different things they want to measure and evaluate, but what seems to be the trend now? Sustainability or anything other?
Tero, hi. I hope all is well in Finland. Good to hear from you. I guess if we go back to, say, 2017, when our adventure with event evaluation started, when we started doing more and more projects, I'd say that was a breakthrough year in terms of the interest in event evaluation from the market. It was really hard to sell to destinations, to event owners, a concept of measuring a lot of different things. Just because they did want, as we outlined in the presentation, they did want to focus on the economic impact, because they saw this as the best metric to show to future bidders. Okay, this is worth X. We want Y in the hosting fee. The hosting fee is less than the economic impact. You do the maths. It's worth doing that. And same with the media figures, because there's more and more skepticism in terms of hosts are looking at the media numbers. Let's say you're gonna have 600 million people watching this event all around the world, 150 or 170 territories. Now, there are many hosts are okay, yeah, fine, but what we've seen over the last few years is, yes, there's more and more interest and understanding of why it's important to analyze other aspects of the event. So yes, probably social and sustainability are the two areas that people are looking at the moment. And we've got to say that no one really found out, the perfect way of measuring social or sustainability impacts. But certainly in terms of sustainability and the UN sustainability goals, it's something that a lot of event owners are looking at the moment. And I think it's just about, the growing understanding of the entire sector, of the entire industry. We don't really have to put a dollar figure to everything. We can look at some of those intangible benefits, and as long as they are evidence, as long as there is a proof that you can deliver in other areas than just media and economic, then you already have a good argument when you start conversations with future hosts.
Cool. And then we have one more question, but before that, I wanted to ask you, based on what you just answered, is there a difference between measuring a sports event and also, let's say, a music event?
It's an interesting question, actually, because it's something that we've been working on during this period as to how to transfer these processes into conferences, into music events, and the process is the same. It's all about asking, why are you hosting in the first place? So instead of a sports event, it could be a large conference, and the aim of host cities bringing conferences is usually to drive a bit of tourism, image and reputation around the conference topic. And this is very similar to why people host sports events. So we are converting our processes into other areas. So we do now look at entertainment properties, music events, conferences. It's very much a similar process that we can implement to evaluate these as well.
And I mean, in your presentation, you said that a lot of the sport events that was organized before, one of their main objectives in the beginning is to develop their sporting, let's say, culture in their country. But because there is no proper measurement put in place, it cannot be measured at the end, or actually what their objectives was in the beginning, they didn't really meet the objectives at the end, because there was not really a proof to having sport being developed after that particular event was being held. So that was something very interesting, because I think the trend is when you say, let's bring a sport event to the country, not even a sport event, maybe a music event or something, you want to develop that part of that industry in your country. So I guess we really need to put in a lot of measurement in the beginning to really set the objectives, and as you said, to really collect the data so that we can measure all along the way, and from before, during, and also after the event itself. Let's take one more question, and I think we can slowly wrap it up. We have a question from Mary Ang. Hello, thanks for sharing. I might have missed a huge part because I've just shown. Could you please share what statistical models are commonly used to measure event data? And what was the confidence interval in the most recent application? Possible to use the most recent study completed as an example to explain.
Yeah, Mary, you probably know more about statistics than ourselves. We are not statisticians per se. We sometimes hire some subcontractors to look at the more sort of scientific part of what we do. What I can tell you is that, for example, when we do event surveys, we are normally, in terms of sort of sampling, we are normally looking at the confidence level of 95% and the interval margin of error of 3 to 5%. It really depends on the event, on the research budget, on the ability to survey people on site. So there is sort of no one approach that we have. We really have to sometimes adapt to to the circumstances, I would say. Yeah, well, Colin, have you got anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would really add to that, when we conduct our primary research, so if we're on site at an event and conducting surveys of spectators, you're always wanting to get a reasonable proportion of responses in relation to how many unique spectators have attended the event. And as Chris says, this really does depend on the research budget, the resource available. Of course, you don't want such a small respondent number that the results aren't significant and are not really of any value, but at least conducting the research in the first place is the first step towards learning more about your spectators and about your event. So that's all I would add to that one. But of course, we are not data scientists.
I'll put you in touch with Mary. I think she's a great person for you to talk to us. She's also somebody who works with data, a lot of data as well.
we may need people like you, Mary. So yeah, let's connect.
All right. And I think one just last question from me is can you give us a good example of a successful event evaluation that you have worked on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one for me was in 2018 in Aarhus in Denmark. So Aarhus hosted the Sailing World Championships, and they had a steering group that was set up far before the event took place. When we went in to do our evaluation, it was very clear what the objectives were, and there was quite a strong focus around the sustainability aspects of the event, and there was quite a wide-ranging educational piece on land for spectators and the participants to see and educate themselves around the sustainability of the event, and also protecting the seas and having clean water. And it was quite nice to see the impact of this, because a second organization actually conducted a survey of event spectators to see what these sustainability educational initiatives, what impact that had on their perception of sustainability. And what it showed is that people were learning things. They were more likely to take the ideas home with them, more recycling, or to have more ground garden plots, or to think more about the litter that is in the seas and the oceans and how they can help to prevent that. So as an evaluation that incorporated a look at the sustainability aspects, for me, that was a really good example of an organization that is well defined in their objectives, they implemented well, and the output got the result that they wanted. So yeah, that would be a good event for me as an example.
Very nice. And actually, we had a sustainability topic during the events management course that we had. And one of the major points that Geert mentioned, who was our speaker, he said, always measure to manage. So I think that sums up, in a way, what we need to do with event evaluation. We really need to define, like what you said in the beginning, to define and align with the objectives, and don't only start right at the nearly end or just before the start of an event and think like, oh, I need some statistics at the end, so let's do some collection, but really define it from the beginning. I think that's the main key point that I can take from our discussion today. So thank you very much, Colin and Chris, for joining us, and I hope those who have joined us throughout the presentation, that you guys have a better understanding of why is it important to collect data to improve not only your current event, but actually to see how it can be used to improve future events, maybe not even your own event, but an event that you are going to contribute to in other aspects as well. So thank you very much, Chris. And Colin, if you guys want to contact Colin or Chris or Quantum Consultancy and get to know more, maybe seek out their services for your event, please do not hesitate to contact them on LinkedIn, or if you have any questions as well. You can also always get in touch with Ignites, and we can always put you in touch with Chris or Colin. Do join us next week on Tuesday, as we have a very interesting topic, something that we also touch upon today about COVID-19. And it's going to touch upon what is the safe way to readmit fans into the stadiums. So once again, thank you very much to both our speakers, and thank you all. Stay safe and remember to wash your hands. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure.